this producer, Unfiltered.
Woo! Like Robert Hanssen, for example, for 20 years, he was working for the FBI and the KGB. He gave over thousands of documents, he identified assets, and he basically gave up the names of his colleagues, and many of them were executed. What is it like to meet and speak to someone like that and also be able to dive into their psyche?
Well, that's a good question because it reminded me of work that I did in my psychiatric training when on a few occasions, thankfully not that many, I had to deal with people who had actually been murderers, in some cases of their own family. And in effect, what I drew upon was my medical training as a medical student, that you're forced to deal with the bodily parts, bodily fluids, horrible diseases, and you have to form a kind of detachment from that terrible stuff to be able to do your job. And because you see it as a higher calling, you force yourself to pull away from it at least enough so that you can maintain your own sanity. And you have to do that repeatedly. I guess the very first thing that pushes this upon you is at the very first week of medical school, you start working in gross anatomy laboratory with literally dead bodies that you have to dissect. And so right from the beginning, they don't pull the punches on you. So with that sort of a background professionally, when I worked with my first spy, Earl Pitts, I guess in retrospect, I would have to say I was glad that he did not do major harms to the country, and nobody, to my knowledge, was executed because of his activities. So that was a partial experience that got me used to working with somebody who's done a bad thing, but it was within certain limitations. And you're quite right. When I took on my second major spy, namely Robert Hanssen, that was harder because of exactly the reasons that you gave. There was much more serious damage, and also people were executed. I had to go back to that same professional detachment that I developed in medical training, because I had to see it as a higher calling that required me to do this. And my higher calling was, I felt that there was a deficiency of knowledge about what went into the minds of people who choose to cross the line, and the risk factors for our country are so immense that the lack of such knowledge was really hurting us in a very large way. And therefore, it was my duty to dial down my natural disgust, if you will, for what they had done, in the service of having to preserve my usual empathic way of dealing with people, so that I would get the information that I needed.
Wow. And what are some of the misguided beliefs about insider spies that you were kind of trying to get to the bottom of?
Among the misguided things were the typical issues that are brought up by the acronym MICE, M-I-C-E. That's all over the place when you read about counterintelligence and the motivations of spies. Now, the M stands for money. And what I already knew, we all know this, is that when the FBI pulls in its latest spy and they're asked by the media, well, why did they do it? Invariably, they say they did it for the money. And in other words, greed, one of the 7 deadly sins. And they believe it, and they know that the audience will comprehend it because everybody understands, oh yeah, people do a lot of nasty things for money. So that's pulled out invariably, but it has huge limitations because it's so ubiquitous, so common, that you haven't actually said anything new or deep about anybody. The way I like to describe that is the following, Nicole. I made this up, and it's the following. I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to give you the answer, and I'm going to ask you if you're satisfied with the answer. Here's the question. Why do people eat in gourmet restaurants? The answer, because they're hungry. All right, are you satisfied with that answer? Well,
Absolutely
of course they're hungry,
not.
but that's not telling us why they eat in gourmet restaurants. That's dissatisfying.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I could say the same about the explanation of why somebody spies for the money. And you could nod your head and say, all right, but that's not quite enough. And that's my complaint about reaching for that explanation reflexively without any deeper thought.
What's
So that's,
the rest
yeah,
of
go ahead.
the rest of the, what else does MICE stand for?
Right. The I stands for ideology. And that's very understandable because a lot of the most famous spies going back several decades ago in the 30s, 40s, were ardent communist sympathizers. We've read stories about them, the Cambridge Five, so on and so on. So that was a time when it appears on the surface, anyhow, that people were persuaded by a particular ideology, and that's the reason that they did it. I would say that while that's not entirely wrong with some people, when you scratch that surface layer and dig a little deeper, almost always you find other things in their life that played a big part in the formation of their character and personality that preceded their attachment to a particular ideology. And so, in a sense, the ideology is a rationalization of what anyhow is driving them on a deeper level. So to simply write off any of these spies as ideological, I think is still staying too superficial on the subject. So that's the I. C is compromise. Compromise means that they caught you doing a thing that is socially or criminally unacceptable. Now, going back 20, 30 years, if you were gay and they caught you in some gay relationship or had that on a tape or video, well, that would be a disaster if that came out for your family or for your career. And they could hang that over you and force you to do their bidding. Otherwise, they would reveal this to the world. So that's compromise. And the last one is ego. And you've heard the terms thrown about plenty, like he's narcissistic and he's full of grandiose, and he's doing this because he does it for the excitement and all of those kinds of description. And I poke fun at that because I think that's kind of name calling in a way, because I know many people in the intelligence community, in the armed forces, and so forth, other agencies of the country, law enforcement, and so forth. And if you picked ego to be the reason why they are a risk to the country, then you'd have to fire 85% of them. So what have you said that's new or really powerful to say that somebody's got an ego? It takes an ego to be a hardworking, ambitious person, and to want to climb the levels of to get promoted and so forth. And that's the reason why you became a spy. Not so fast.
Is there something that all of the spies you had, I don't want to call it the pleasure, or perhaps it was some type of pleasure meeting and working with, is there something that they all had in common?
Yes, and that gets to the core psychology that I identified. I don't mean to say that that explains everything, but to me, it provides a firmer foundation for understanding their psychology. And I'll tell you right now, because I condensed it into a statement, a short statement. And here it is: an intolerable sense of personal failure as privately defined by that person. An intolerable sense of failure, personal failure as privately defined by that person. Now, why do I highlight that? Because roughly 95% of spies are men. Oh, then we really need to think about male psychology. Oh, well, what is it that we kind of all know, whether we speak about it out loud or not? Underneath the surface, tough guy, manly sort of exterior that all men want to present to the world, they're quite a lot more sensitive on the inside than you'd ever guess. Now, us guys know that. And actually, all the women who have guys in their life know that too. And so one of the things we know about guys is that we have a high sense of pride, male pride and ego. And anything that does damage to male pride and ego is felt very sensitively inside of a guy. And he's got to deal with that. There's no dodging it. He's got to look at himself in the mirror every morning. And if he feels within himself that he has not measured up to the expectations and goals that he had in mind for himself, that somehow his life has not gone that way, that hurts him deeply, whether he admits it or says it out loud. And if that's the case, he's got to do something about it. Now, a lot of the choices that men pick don't really solve the problem very well. Well, let's take some examples. He can become an alcoholic. A lot of alcoholics in the world, and they do that to numb their feelings. And most of the time, it's, again, senses of personal failure at some level. If they're married, they can have an affair. If they're unhappy, they can decide, well, that's where I'm living. If I just move to another city, I'll do better. And it goes on and on. There'll be all kinds of moves that guys can make to distract themselves, numb their feelings, run away from that sense of failure. Now, it so happens that if you're in a particular situation, the context of your life is the way I think of it, you will have options to play out this terrible feeling in a variety of ways, and a small subset of people will take extreme measures. So there's a term that at least I've heard here in Washington, when somebody goes postal. Well, what does that mean? Somebody works literally for the post office, and things are not going right in his life. Now, you don't hear about that at first, but all you know is that he comes into work one night with an AK-47, blows away 6 of his co-workers plus his boss, and then maybe turns the gun on himself. He's gone postal. He's snapped. You don't see it, but 3, 4, 5 weeks later in the newspaper, you start hearing about what they discovered about his personal life. Maybe that his wife had an affair with his best friend, or that he worked very hard, was hoping for a promotion, but instead he got demoted. It goes on and on, all the things that didn't work out well. And somehow they built up inside of him. He was concealing the impact upon him, but finally he snaps and does this horrible thing. Now, when we're talking about spies, we have a different context, obviously. These are people working inside of a US intelligence agency like the CIA or the FBI that has had his version of badness pile up in his life. And there are many ways that guys like that wind up trying to manage it. I mentioned that before. They can become alcoholics. They may get medical conditions. They may show poor performance on the job. They may have personal problems in their family. A small subset of them will discover, oh, the way that I can manage this and show them is by crossing the line, because it's not me that's the failure. No, it's this damn place that I'm working for. And I know just how to get back at them.
It's very interesting because I mean, I've done my fair share of research about spies, and I'm trying to think of a few that perhaps I don't see it and maybe you could shed some light, but someone like, and you know, they weren't American, but someone like George Blake or Dmitry Polyakov didn't seem like they were failures in their life.
Right. Now, bear in mind that I make no claims about understanding the psychology of people from other countries, because I didn't work with anybody from another country. So to truly, people may choose to become spies for other reasons in other life situations and contexts. In our country, I'm dealing with the guys that I know about here. Nevertheless, even with some of those names that you mentioned, when you do just the littlest bit of digging, you will discover the very same things that I talked about. So remember, I talked about ideology, that the second of the MICE acronym. A case could be made that a guy like George Blake and Polyakov, you know, on the surface, they were very high-minded reasons for them to be doing what they did. And we would characterize them as high-minded. But if you put the microscope on their psychology and dug deeper, you would see rather similar situations occurring, I believe, that would be the foundational changes going on within them that they found a way to manage by rationalizing actions based on high-minded purposes.
Like Polyakov's son.
Yes. Every one of them, if you dug a little deeper, you'd have to figure out, okay, what really led up to their willingness to cross the line in our direction, of course. And we would say, well, they were heroes, but you know, people are still people wherever they live.
Now that you mention it, George Blake actually, he never felt like he belonged, right?
Yes.
In Britain.
Yes.
He came
all
from
of these personal feelings that are very powerful operate inside their minds, and they have to, and of course we all, when we do something, we want to find a higher purpose to what we do, because we got to live with ourselves. We don't want to just simply say, well, I felt like I was, you know, given no proper recognition for my efforts, and that people thought that I was a loser. And who wants to dwell on that? No, they're going to look for something that seems pretty high powered.
Now, the American spies that you analyzed, were any of them, do they have remorse? Is that possible, or are their actions justifiable until the end?
Every one of them expressed remorse to me. Not at the beginning, mind you, but along the way. Bear in mind that I worked with all of them nearly for a full year. And my methodology was sort of a mix of what to call it, you know, basic psychiatry, almost like journalistic, and absolutely not in the format of an interrogator. I avoided that like the plague. because then I'd be like all the other people that they were dealing with. I basically would keep my inquiries very simple. I never did like tough probing exercises, like a Mike Wallace would do, because that was not my aim. My aim was to create a safe environment, an empathic listening ear, and to keep my mouth shut for the most part. You can't tell from our talk right now because you're interviewing me, but I have one capacity. I have one capability that I honed over all the years of my practice, which can be summarized by one simple thing. I know how to shut up. And when you shut up, that gives air time for the other person to fill it with what's on their mind. And if you do that time and again on a weekly basis for a year, things will come out naturally. You don't have to twist anybody's arm. It'll just leak out sooner or later. That's how I did my work.
What was the most interesting thing you learned from analyzing insider spies?
That they're very complicated people, that if you give them a chance, you will begin to discover the earliest experiences that they went through that set them up for this enormous next thing of crossing the line, that you really can get to understand how they view the world, even if it was for a while twisted, but it makes a certain sort of logical sense. Now, I got to add one thing that I was taught by one of my psychiatry professors that really lasted for me for the rest of my career. It's a short statement, but it contains a lot. My professor said, to understand is not to condone. He said that to us as students of psychiatry because we were really into understanding everybody, and it seemed to implicitly mean that we could, if we understood it, we could forgive just about anything, because now we understand it. Well, push that to the limit. Let's say we had some magnificent understanding of Adolf Hitler. Would that mean that, oh, well, that these kids killed 6 million Jews? Well, now we get it, we understand. No. So to understand is not to condone. And even though I worked with these people and I got to understand them, it didn't mean that I was saying, oh, well, then what they did is okay. No, it wasn't okay.
Did you at any point feel like you were spying on them? Was there...
I wouldn't call it spying, but let's try this, because I did make one interesting connection. All the spies that have handlers, that's the technical term, a handler. That's that person from the other intelligence agency whose job it is to create their own warm relationship with their agent, namely the spy. Why are they doing that? Because they want to know what makes their spy tick. They want productivity. They want that spy to be able to perform in a big way in terms of providing a flow of classified information over a long span of time, and whatever it takes to bring forth productivity is professionally that's their goal. And it is a mixture of praising them, doing favors for them, creating a tight relationship, and now and then tugging on the leash, because if somebody's getting lazy or not getting the right stuff, you gotta kind of lean on them a little bit. So from what I'm saying, you can tell there's a bit of an art and a science to do that. And the main purpose of it is exploitation. Okay. Now, when I went in there, I did that as an agent of its defense, their own defense, with maybe the idea that I would write a report that would maybe soften their sentence a little bit. So I was on their side, so to speak. But admittedly, I had my own motivations. And what were they? Education. I wanted to get educated and understand what went into their thinking for the benefit of our national security, for me to be able to explain that into the intelligence community to protect our survival and interest. Now, if you want to twist that a little bit, could you call that an exploitation also? Well, that's stretching it a little bit. I don't think it was. They were at a point now where what their fate really hinged on how things would play out in the legal justice system, not what I would do. And I was trying to give them a chance to describe their life, their thoughts, their feelings. And believe me, when they were already in jail, I like to describe the nature of the people that they have associations with when they're in the slammer. One, fellow inmates. Well, there's limited contact with them, and most of the inmates where they are kind of on the low-life criminal side. And these guys are pretty smart. They wouldn't have been where they were otherwise. So it's not like these are natural friend options for them. And plus, there's very limited contact. Secondly, there are the jail keepers, the marshals and so forth. And they are not the warm, fuzzy types, I can tell you that, because they're dealing with really nasty people. And they don't have a whole lot of time. They're very busy. So that's not like a source of human warmth for our spy. Then they have their own attorneys. Now, I can tell you that getting into the jail and to talk with your prisoner is not an easy thing to do. I mean, there's a lot of layers that you have to go through that are rather annoying and scary, like electric doors slamming behind you one after the other. It takes easily half an hour from the time you arrive before you have a hope of actually being in a room with one of these people, and not unusually a full hour. So, picture a busy attorney having to meet with their client, the spy, and going through all of that. And lawyers, on average, are not actually the most simpatico types either. They're there to do a job, to do the defense. It's their reputation at stake also. And they have a lot of things to say to their client, but they don't have a lot of time to listen. All right, then the next group of people would be when the damage assessment panels are held, where you're brought in to speak to the FBI personnel who want to know what you did, what you gave away. Plus, there are members of your former agency that you betrayed. They're on the other side of the table, these people. And you sit there and they're asking you questions, and you can look in their eye and can tell that the one thing they really want to do is leap over the table and strangle you to death, because you betrayed everything they're for. Okay, these are all the cast of characters that you see on a daily or weekly basis. And you're getting nothing of any humane contact. But then I come in and I treat them respectfully, deferentially. I don't interrogate them, and I just listen, and I ask an occasional question. And I do that on a weekly basis, where they get a chance to actually feel that somebody's paying attention to them. So that's the setting that allows me to learn about a lot of what's going on in their mind throughout the whole experience. And it gives them at least a little bit of human support that they otherwise wouldn't be getting. So now I contrast that, with the handler who's doing some of the same things. because he wants to exploit them to be a better spy. And what I'm trying to do is learn what they were thinking so that that education will help protect us in the future. There's a partial overlap, I'll admit that, but mostly I'm doing it because I'm being nice.
And handlers are a very interesting topic as well, because are any of them psychologically trained?
They all are.
Okay.
The handlers are all trained. In fact, let's just admit that handlers exist on our side of the national scene also, and our guys who handle agents are trained to a fairly well about psychology because they have the same job that the hostile intelligence agent has with our people that they've recruited. We go out and try to recruit their people, and we've got to be smart and psychologically minded also. So you can make a case that there's a club of people who do pretty much the same thing around the world. That this knowledge is not something that maybe is commonly known, but among us people in this larger club, everybody is doing the same thing. And by the way, it's not new stuff. This has been going on for at least 3,000 years of human history.
Mm-hmm. And does that come up in the defense? My handler who had access to my psychology from the other side of the world made me do these things or pushed me to do these things, etc.
Well, I can almost assure you that that defense has never been used because it would get absolutely nowhere in this country in front of a judge or a jury. Oh, yeah, thank you. They roll their eyes. So any good attorney is going to try other reasons to come up with a defense argument.
Yeah. Also, what kind of stress and anxiety, what kind of a life is it to be a double agent? What comes with that kind of a lifestyle?
Well, I try to understand that also because it's not a fun life. Here's why. There's a term that I came across called spook hours. Spook hours. Spook is this cute way of saying spy. Well, the spy has to do his regular day job during the day from 9 to 5 or 6 or whatever his job happens to be. And then their spy type work is going to be done after hours, spook hours. So in other words, they don't have an 8-hour workday. They have many hours of a workday. And at first it seem to be very exciting and interesting, and you have to learn how to do trade craft is what it's called, all the tricky bits like invisible writing and different ways of communicating and drop sites and all the rest. So that's fun for a while. And then doing SDR, surveillance detection route, where if you're going to meet somebody or find a drop site, you have to be sure you're not followed and spend 2 hours or more walking through a city and going into subways and going through stores and going on, always checking to see, are you being followed? The first several times you do that, that's a fun thing. It's like a kid again playing a game. But what about the 40th time? And it's snowing and it's cold outside, etc. So, I mean, all of this stuff is very wearing. But the worst of all, separate from all of that, is contained in one single word: uncertainty. Uncertainty. The uncertainty of when you might be discovered. And no spy is free of this worry, because as good as their tradecraft can be, they all know that that doesn't mean a whole lot after all. There's so many ways that they can be discovered. The easiest way they can be discovered is that somebody from the other side decides they've had enough. The way I kid about it, I say, somebody at KGB headquarters gets tired of having borscht and a boiled potato for lunch every day. He wants a Big Mac. So he's going to cross over to the United States. What will he bring with him? He has to prove his bona fides. And how does he do that? He brings information, everything he can get about the spies that the KGB recruited, because that is the treasure that he will bring over to the FBI if he crosses to our side. And that will get him, money and a new place to live, and he'll become an American. So you never know when somebody in your own agency will find his personal reason to want to cross over, and therefore you will be revealed to the counterintelligence people that you have betrayed. And the idea is that you never know when the other shoe will drop if you're a spy. And that uncertainty preys on the mind. And I like to say that that is the worst mental condition for human beings, generally speaking. Now, why do I say that? If you get bad news of whatever sort, I don't care what it is, it hurts you, it knocks you flat, you're really terrified by it, whatever. And after a day, a week, 3 weeks, you finally say to yourself, all right, it is what it is. All right, now what do I have to do? I don't want to do this, but now what do I have to do? So that's bad news. But uncertainty, when you don't know what's going to happen, your mind is filled with imaginations of what could happen. And that you can do 24/7, and you never get any answers. So it eats at you all the time. You're never free from it. And that is the psychological burden that any spy carries that wears them out.
And is it safe to say that once they get busted, they tend to feel a sense of relief?
That's a damn good question, and I don't know the answer to that because I think there's a mixture of things that occurs. I think your speculation about a certain amount of relief is actually true, because at least finally the uncertainty is over with. And when I talk about the 10 stages of the insider spy, that's in one of my white papers on the subject. There's a stage before they're actually caught, when there's premonitions that they're about to be caught, that many spies have. Now, why is that? Because I know that from the spies themselves. What I have learned is that, let's say there's a camera that's been inserted in the ceiling of your office, very cleverly, because they want to get the information to prosecute you with. Let's say the FBI's planted that in there. And they see the US guy who's become a spy doing kind of stupid things related to their tradecraft, and they joke about it because, oh boy, look how stupid he is. Well, first of all, how come they knew to put the camera in the ceiling? Because somebody from outside of our country came to them with the information. How come they spied for 10 years before you ever even knew one thing about it? Oh, are they that stupid then? Maybe you were stupid for not catching them after 1 year. And so why are they doing these sloppy tradecraft things? Because somewhere they know they have such paranoia that has developed huge antenna for detecting everything that's a threat to them, that they know, they can tell from subtle signals that the FBI is on to them. So it's almost like, okay, I know the game is up. Just get the hell over with it already, and let's be over with it. So, like what you were saying, there would be an element of relief. I'm done with this. I'm just too exhausted. I can't stand living this way anymore. At least this part of my life is over.
What were Robert Hanssen's famous words when he got arrested?
Well, he's claimed to have said, "What took you so long?" And of course, that fit into the psychology that was being attributed to him, that he was kind of a nasty, arrogant, grandiose sort of a guy, and he sounded like a snotty teenager, that got caught. And that fit the psychology that the Bureau leveled at him. But the way I explain that is rather different, because it reminds me of what I talk about. Remember, I said the intolerable sense of personal failure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the first failure is when you are thinking that your life is not running the way you would hope for. In effect, yes, you feel like a failure. So what you did to solve your problem was to cross the line, because that was a brilliant solution to all your problems, except you discover after a few months that you didn't solve any problem at all. The crisis that led you to cross the line is long since over. No crisis lasts forever. And also you discover that you can't do anything about it. You're stuck. Now, why are you stuck? Here's why. What are you going to do? Go to your spy handler and say, gee, you know what? I don't know what was in my mind when I made this decision. I've come to realize it really isn't such a good idea. And I wonder if maybe we could just forget this happened. That would be like going to a mafia don that did you a favor a year ago and saying the same thing. How far do you get with a mafia don if you said that, please let me go? Can we pretend that this never happened? It ain't happening, right? All right. Okay, you'll do the other alternatives. You do the right thing, and you want to turn yourself in to the security people and say, you know what, I made a stupid mistake. I was under such personal pressure at the time, and I crossed the line a little bit, not a whole lot, really, not a lot, but I want you to know about it, and I want to clean up things as best as I can. And you'll be welcomed back with open arms, right? Wrong. Because I call that sharks in a shark tank. Sharks, they can swim around with each other very fine, but if one of them gets nicked and starts to bleed, they'll turn on that shark like prey, and that will be a dead shark. And that's what actually happens to people in the intelligence community. If they just crossed a little bit, did a little something wrong, and they want to do, quote, the right thing, I've talked to a number of them, and they are treated like full-on spies, and they get their careers ruined, and their attempt to fix things just ruins their life. And don't think that doesn't get out into the corridor. In other words, people know this. So now we're talking about the stuckness of the situation some months after somebody's crossed the line. And isn't that really a second huge failure in their life? They had their first failure, and now they realize their attempt to rescue themselves has turned out to be a disaster, and they can't get out of it. Second failure. Now, when they're finally caught, that's the third major failure of their life. Why? They tried to fix their problem, and now they not only failed the first two times, they couldn't even be a good enough spy not to get caught. And plus, this time, everybody knows it. Everybody knows it's public. Three big failures.
Oh. So, so to say what took you guys so long, where do you think that really came from then?
It comes from, at that moment, the third failure slammed Hanssen square in the head, and he had to manage that sense of failure by turning it around and being like a snotty teenager that was caught with too many miles on the odometer when he wasn't supposed to use dad's car last night at all. And they caught him. So he comes out like a snotty kid to keep his ego intact. and it fits what they ascribe to him, but really underneath it, it's his third big and now public failure.
Mm-hmm. Now, have you ever interviewed female spies?
No, I almost did. Almost. I was almost brought into one case that's quite famous right now, but for certain reasons that I can't get into, I did not get into that specific case.
What
I would
about,
like to have done that, but that would have been quite fascinating.
do you, I'm sure you're well researched on the motivations of female spies, even without meeting any
Oh yeah,
personally.
yeah.
Can you tell us the difference?
That's part of my um, white papers that I've written, of which there are 3, to point out the gender differences. Thank you. That's you have it. Thank you very much. All right. For guys, I've already made the point that that it's failure. But let's talk about the top things that everybody wants in their life. There's a list of 200 important things that we all want, of course, to happen in their life. But at the top 2, I'd say, I'll go out on a limb and say, professional career achievement and successful, warm, intimate relationship with another person, your life companion. That would be true for men and women both. Mm-hmm. And below 1 and 2 would be, a couple of hundred more maybe. I would say, and this is overgeneralizing and maybe a bit unfair, but for most guys, they'd probably put career as number 1 and the relationship number 2. Whereas for most women, it would be the reverse, historically. They want that relationship first and their career number 2. I'm overgeneralizing. But that says something, because it's easy to see the situations with the male spies and their career troubles. It's a little bit harder with the women. But what we do know about that, because we have some evidence from the story in Earl with East Germany, and it's very successful.
Marcus Wolf.
The spy, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So they trained guys to be kind of like Romeo types. They would go after, let's say, secretaries or admin clerks that were women, but they were very selective. They went for women that were not all that attractive, that did not have a man in their life, and they had a deficit of this kind of need that every woman has. A man has the need too, but a woman who is missing out on somebody that really does something for her as a companion in life, that vulnerability was very cleverly targeted by the East Germans. So I would say that very often with women spies, I can't say all the time, and I don't know enough really, but I'm speculating that sort of situation is what would be at the root of a lot of women that cross the line.
So these men were trained on how to romance a woman and get her to reveal information for the person that she was working for.
Exactly.
And how successful were they?
Very. They they penetrated right to the top of up to the level of the German head of state. I mean, it was remarkable how successful it was. It was run by the spy master was Marcus Wolf. He was known as the man without a face because he was very clever at never getting his photograph published anywhere. And he was a genius working for the wrong side. But even people from our side had respect for him because he was so damn clever and he figured out these strategies.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The spies that I interviewed would take their hats off to Marcus Wolf, kind of like a mutual respect for, a really great chess game player.
Exactly. Exactly.
They never ever spoke about him with hatred or any type of negative feeling, really. It was more just like, yeah, that's what he did, and wow, yeah, he did that. You
Exactly.
know.
Yeah, it is exactly that way.
Hmm. Who's your favorite spy?
Well, how do you define favorite?
How do you define favorite?
Well, I'll frame it this way. Look, I like any human being, I'm going to warm up to a person who is capable of receiving that sort of interest on my part. So my very first spy, named Earl Pitts, I there's a lot to say about him. He was from the Midwest. He was an attorney, worked for the FBI, and he had a sort of professorial kind of demeanor. He was smart. He was not a blowhard or grandstander. And the reasons that he had for crossing the line, I believe, partially were, I'll use the word accidental. That's grist for the mill for another entire program. I won't go into it right now. But I was able to form a pretty tight relationship with him during the time that I knew him. I kept up with him over 20 years of his incarceration in federal prison. Many letters were exchanged back and forth with him. And when he got out, roughly a couple of years ago, I reconnected with him by phone, by letter, and I actually went out of my way and bought him a Mac laptop so that he could get connected with a world that changed so vastly during the time he was in jail. And so we still have a kind of a reasonably tight relationship that's episodic, but still, I like the guy, and he likes me. And so, from the point of view of favorite, in that category, he would be the one.
As a
Now, the
person.
one that was the most complicated, and everybody knows his name, and therefore it's kind of been helpful in getting my material out there into the world, was Robert Hanssen.
Mm.
But every one of them, I can name two other people that I work with, they were each in their own way quite unique, fascinating, different, yet still sharing some of those fundamental psychological issues that I talked about.
Mm-hmm. And who's your favorite spy? What's your favorite spy story? Like someone that you maybe didn't work with, but you're just intrigued by their life story.
Oh my.
There's some good ones.
Well, I could come up with this one. Philby in the UK. Now, of course, I never spoke with him or anything, but he also was so talented, if you want to call it that, that he worked his way up to the very top of the intelligence communities of not just UK, but also the United States. And he completely flim-flammed our top counterintelligence person in the CIA, James Angleton. And the impact that happened in our intelligence services when he finally was discovered had enormous damage to our whole setup for many years, many years. So again, it's not like I love this guy, not in the least, but it's just
just
like,
as an intriguing.
Yeah.
What was fascinating for me to read about was that Philby, you can arguably say, groomed Angleton from when he first started as an officer. I think he trained him also on how to be a double agent, etc. And they formed this bond, and Angleton really thought that they were allies. I've asked people in the CIA their thoughts on this, but it's a controversial opinion. But I think that there was a mole in the CIA that had never been found. And I think that it was Angleton without him even knowing it.
Oh, that's an interesting way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I mean, the damage that Angleton did for really many years because of his own psychology. Remember, I mentioned the point that if you put yourself out to be the world's expert on spies, and under your very nose, one of the worst spies operated without you catching on to it, what does it say about you and your claims to your expertise? It makes you into a fool. And then that forces you to do things that try to say to the world, well, you're not a fool. But then you wind up doing more damage to your own agency than even the enemy could do. So I take your point. I agree with you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my point is even more controversial than that. I genuinely believe that he was sharing information with Philby that he shouldn't have been sharing.
Oh, I'm sure that's true.
Yeah.
Of course it's true.
And perhaps that's why the Cold War was a very intense time where double agents were getting caught left and right on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah.
So it's, it's pretty crazy. So I would really like to talk about you and how you even got started in this field and what kind of turned you on to this idea.
Well, the time was during the Vietnam War when I was fundamentally forced to be in the United States Air Force because I was a doctor, and they had what amounted to a draft for doctors, and they had a special plan called the Berry Plan that allowed you to finish your specialty training, for me, psychiatry, before going in as a doctor. Otherwise, I'd be a general medical officer. I didn't want to do that. I may as well, but I have to go in, I'll go in as a psychiatrist. And I did that, and did that for 2 years, 1 month, 3 days, 12 hours, and 7 minutes.
Wow. Was
Now,
that horrible?
no, it wasn't. I kid about it that way. I actually learned a lot of stuff that I never would have understood or ever gotten into this field that we're talking about today. So, though I have to say, if I had my choice, I would have passed on it, but I didn't have a choice. At any rate, my second year, I managed to get myself transferred here to Washington, to Andrews Air Force Base. And in the course of me running the outpatient psychiatric clinic at the hospital there, I got to see a number of people from NSA, because that was not terribly far from Andrews Air Force Base. And that was the thing that raised my interest for the first time in the entire field of intelligence. When I got out of the Air Force, I thought, gee, it would be interesting to be, a consultant part-time, to one of the intel agencies. And since I was moving to Northern Virginia, that would have been the obvious choice was CIA. So I asked for an application to be a referral resource. And I got this really thick thing in the mail that wanted to know everything about my life, going back to my mommy, my toilet training, and it went on and on. And I just, I was too busy starting my civilian life, starting my practice, where I live. I said, I just can't do this now. It's too much. I started my practice, and then I started to grow it into a little clinic in my own office building. And at a certain point, I topped out. I had everything going. The offices were filled. I get one more call from somebody who wanted a job. She was a social worker, and she dropped a name on me of one of my best buddies in my training. So I just had to give her an interview, and she was, in fact, really terrific. Everything you would want from another social worker working in our practice. So I had to make room for her at the table, so to speak. And then roughly 9 months later, I get a letter out of the blue from CIA telling me that I now am okay to receive referrals from CIA. And I was astonished because I didn't apply. I didn't know that I was being checked out. None of that was clear. But after a while, I was able to solve the mystery. That last social worker that I hired was the daughter of a social worker working at CIA who was the first to stand up their employee assistance program. And she, on her own initiative, put me into the pipeline for being a candidate to be a referral resource. And bingo, there I was. It was like unexpected, happy accident. And that led me to 10 years worth of immersion into the intelligence world because I was seeing people from all over CIA and learning about what it was like to be in that place. Now, I got to always say that I never heard anything classified. And why was that? I was trained never to ask anything about something classified. And all my patients were also instructed not to tell me anything classified. So that was cool. I was fine with that. But you learn a lot from the culture and the nature of the other people, and you just absorb a whole lot anyhow. And then the next accidents were that one of the people who was working very part-time for me was a government psychiatrist, and a friend of his tapped him on the shoulder one weekend because they had an interesting case come into their law firm where they presented it to the psychiatrist working part-time for me, saying, gee, this is fascinating. It's an FBI special agent who turned out to be a KGB spy. We'd like you to consult on this. And Larry said, well, gee, it really is very fascinating, but I can't do it. It would be a conflict of interest. I think I know somebody who could do that. That turned out to be me. That's my story of how I got into this stuff.
Wow. And I feel like you have superpowers as a psychiatrist. And I'm just imagining you walking around at CIA. Were they afraid that you would find out what they didn't want anyone to find out? Like, did you ever notice
Not really.
behaviors or
No,
anything
and
spy-like?
that's not off the wall what you're saying, except that most of the people that I connected with at the agency during those years were people from the Office of Medical Services. So they were used to the psychiatrist. But if you run into other people that had other jobs, that might be possible. So, for example, since you mentioned that, when I was in the Air Force, my first year, I was at a SAC base, which is like nuclear weapons up in Plattsburgh, New York. And here's what I discovered. Not one pilot ever dared come to see me for the reasons that you said. They were afraid that I would see through whatever they were putting out. And I would see that they were crazy and that I would ground them. And that was their worst terror. So they wouldn't come near me at all. But guess what? They all had very tight relationships with the flight surgeons, the doctors associated with the crew. And so what would happen is that the flight surgeons would hear their actual problems. The flight surgeons would come to me and present the case. I would listen to them and come out with some ideas and solutions about how to handle it. And then the flight surgeon would go back. So I would treat the pilots with somebody in between the two of us.
Wow. Yeah, I can't imagine because there's this one specific former spy that I have met, and his face is not readable. I can't get anything from his face ever. Literally nothing. And I mean, I'm usually the person, I can meet a stranger at a gate at the airport, and within 10 minutes, I know their entire life history and all their problems and what they're going through. I'm just very easy, I guess, to, I don't know, kind of be on a down-to-earth level with people. Nothing from this person. I could not. Do you share that experience? I mean, are they afraid to even look into your eyes sometimes?
I run into people who are that way, yes. I really have. Sometimes at quite high levels within the intelligence community or having retired from there. And I believe that the reason is exactly what you're saying, that they are fearful that I have superpowers that are telepathic and I can read their mind, and they just don't want to have anything to do with me. Yes.
I feel like you can, though, right?
No, I
Sometimes
can't.
you really can.
No, I wish.
We won't
I
tell
wish.
anyone.
No, I wish I had that, but I don't.
But
Life has taught me that.
but isn't a non-readable face readable for you? Or no?
No, not necessarily.
Wow.
No,
So you
no.
can't tell what, their facial expressions or lack of facial expression usually just works. Can I do that?
Yes. I mean, look, this is an art and a science that are prized by people who play professional poker. It's not an unknown thing. And there are some people who are very good at being unreadable. But having said that, there's such a thing as tells. You've heard that expression.
No, never.
Tell, tells. That is to say, little leakage of micro behaviors that give a clue as to what actually is going on, like an eyelid flickering here and there, or the pupils of the eyes dilating, or a little gesture done in a certain way that to other people doesn't mean much, but to you, you've seen this before, or you watch that person and you know that happens only when some fill in the blank is going on. So if you have a lot of exposure, even to somebody who's wired that way, to be able to be unreadable, you'll start to be able to read some things.
And did you ever help train someone on how to be unreadable?
No.
Does that program exist, you think? Probably.
I have no idea. That's an interesting question. I just don't know. Because really, when you think about the spy game, it's most of what you're doing has to be very human, because if you're not human, then that's what draws unwelcome attention. So you actually have to be readable, but in a channeled way if you're in the spy game. So you allow yourself to project your human side to the degree that it's charming and engaging to other people. Otherwise, you're not forming a relationship, and then you're nowhere.
Wow. So intense, all of it.
Yes.
And were you born in the United States?
Yes.
Were your parents born here?
Both of them were born in the US, yes.
Wow. And what's your background? But we share some similar background.
Absolutely, because my mother, while she was born in the US, was raised in Israel.
That's right. Before 1948. That's right. We spoke about that. Yes. Yes.
Yep. So I didn't know it during the whole time that I grew up, but I listened to some tapes that I took one time, years later after she passed away. And I said, oh my gosh, she's got quite an accent. I never heard that growing up because I just didn't process it that way. So yeah, she had a bit of a non-US flavor to her. But my father was a completely US type American.
How did they meet?
Well, that's an interesting story. My mother was raised in Israel, and as a graduation gift for her finishing a teacher's seminary to become a teacher, she was allowed to visit her American cousins that remained in the US. And that was just before World War II broke out.
Mm.
So when she got to the US, she started to meet my extended family, and through them, my father. And her family in Israel basically said, the war is on. It's too dangerous for you to come back. You're going to have to stay in the US for a few years before you dare come back.
Oh my God, I
And
just
so
got
that's,
goosebumps all over my body.
yeah.
Wow.
She met my father. And that's why I think I even said to you, that's why when I speak Hebrew, even though I have a decent accent in Hebrew, no Israeli would not know that I was American. So I said, and that's why, my Hebrew right away broadcast in USA.
Yeah. I know you think I have a great accent in Hebrew, but although it was my first language, I didn't speak English till I was around like 5 or 6.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I spoke only Hebrew when I was a little girl, and when I go to Israel, they know I'm American.
Yes,
they
of
tell
course.
me my accent is so cute.
Yeah.
I'm just like, damn it.
את מדברת בעברית במבטא אמריקאי.
המבטא שלי אמריקאי, אבל יש לי את הרייש. אני לא אומרת רייש.
Yes.
יש לי את
Yes.
הרייש. אז אני מרגישה שאני, שזה נשמע כאילו אני ישראלית, אבל
כן.
הם קולטים אותי right away.
The other letter that's lamed is always very hard for Americans to get right.
Yeah.
It's the tongue doesn't work quite right for the lamed.
Yeah,
And then they'll just
and chet.
chet. I can do the chet, but not the lamed.
Yeah.
Kacha.
It's so funny. Was being a psychiatrist, what did you dream of what did you dream your profession would be as a child?
Well, I didn't dream about anything solid until I got to be roughly 13, 14, when I read Sinclair Lewis's book, Arrowsmith.
Mm.
That was my formative experience because it was a novel about a doctor. And when you're at that age, you have the capability of having a romantic attachment to a career that somehow just seems right at the moment. And once that's seeded into you, it can last. And that's what really drove me to want to become a doctor.
Wow. I had that with movies. Actually, I think I went into journalism because Rory Gilmore on the Gilmore Girls wanted to do that. And I was inspired by television and film. I was actually just telling someone about this the other day, that I would watch movies and then I would try to recreate those scenes with me in them.
Really?
To the point where I legitimately traveled to Thailand because I saw a movie about someone traveling in Thailand. Like, I made it a goal of mine to get there, and I got there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Really? Even my first kiss was totally orchestrated.
Very good.
Yeah. That's just how I did things. So I want to read this book, though, Aerosmith, especially because one of my favorite bands, childhood bands.
Oh, no kidding.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And so tell me a little bit about also what you do now. You said that you treat something that I'm really interested in, besides for anxiety, is ADD in adults.
Yes. Yeah, that's a big part of our practice.
I've been reading more and more about ADD, and I've come to realize, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that it's actually not a disorder. It's a coping mechanism that you're taught when you're little, or that sticks to you when you're little.
No, I don't think that's right exactly. I like to think of it as that there's a range of built-in wiring that we all have in respect to that dimension of being able to focus very minutely and for very long periods of time on whatever it is that we're doing, working on a puzzle as a kid or whatever. And certain professions draw on that, like becoming an accountant or certain kinds of law practice and so on, where having everything organized and systematized and somewhat rigid and all that is what you need to do. And some brains are wired to be able to do that super well. And then other brains are designed to be more adaptive and quick and be able to switch from one thing to another rapidly and to size up things in ways that are not so obvious and so forth. And that's more of an ADD tendency. One of the most interesting dichotomies that has been put up in a metaphorical way to describe it, and they talk about hunter versus farmer. A hunter is going to do better if they're kind of ADD because they have to scan the environment constantly, shift their attention. There's a sound, there's a something in the grass that they can see, and oh, now a new thing has happened. They have to take in all these stimuli from all directions and shift quickly, easily, and so on. That works well if you're ADD-ish as a hunter. But a farmer has got to do the same things day after day and do them right and do them through the seasons and then be very careful about their resources and their seeds and all the stuff they need. So yeah, it's a bit of a stretch to simplify it that way, but it does capture some of the differences about the wiring. And you can see that the human race needed both types of people to collectively succeed in this world that we live in. And so that carries into the modern life. The problem that we have with ADD is that school itself is very much tilted towards the exact and the rigid and the scheduled and the details, so that ADD brains don't often do all that well during their school years. And that hurts them because they get bad grades. They start to feel that they don't measure up and they can get demoralized, some, not all. And so that's why I think there's been a lot of awareness of ADD, because they're trying to help kids who are wired a bit different still do reasonably well in their school years.
And do you believe in medication for it?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do a lot of that.
For young children as well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've treated little kids and teenagers but then with the revolution in that area is only about 20 years long, maybe 15, of the awareness that we used to think that this would be outgrown by kids when they get to be into puberty. But now we know so much better that no, it changes somewhat, yeah, but people held on to the ADD tendencies way into their adult years. And the difference in terms of how people's lives go is when they luck out by playing to their strengths and getting into a line of career that likes the ADD side more than it likes the bookkeeper side. Mm-hmm. And there are people who luck into careers. And since you know the movie world in LA and all that, yep, is that not a place filled with many ADD types? Yes, indeed, because that's where it works. At least for the actors, not so much for the producers and the people with technical demands on them. Mm-hmm. So, and I can give you many other examples where the watchword is play to your strengths. If you know you're wired a particular way, then get into a career that likes that and avoid the careers that don't like that.
Mm. Is it possible to have ADD and not know?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
All the time.
So if I am a serial procrastinator. Is it possible that I just have ADD?
You need a little bit more than that to lock down the diagnosis, but that would be one of the characteristics
Like
that's possible.
I could do 20 minutes of focus, maybe 10 or 15 minutes of straight focus because I'm a writer also,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah,
And then I have to stop, walk to the kitchen, come back and do that again.
yep,
I can't go long,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah,
And so my work takes me, like my job, for example, yes, I have a huge workload, but if I just sat down for, let's say, 6 straight hours, I'd be able to finish by a normal evening hour. But because I don't have that ability, I'm working sometimes till 1 or 2 in the morning.
yeah, yeah. That could, you're giving some of the answers that could collect around that diagnosis. Some,
So it's possible I got it.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. But it's interesting because in college, I would I absorb information really well if I'm in a lecture in class, I just remember and retain everything. If I'm reading it, not so much.
yep,
And I have to write things down to remember them. If I'm reading it, I need to write it down and then it's stored. I've been working with myself over a really long period of time. But what I was going to say, in college, all my friends were taking Adderall.
yes,
So during finals week, I would take like 20 milligram pill and write a 20-page research paper in one night.
yes.
That's crazy. And I was
Yeah,
just like, imagine I took this every day. I would be the most productive person on the planet, you know?
that's right.
But it made me a little bit crazy and I had to go to the bathroom a lot and I wasn't interested. But
Yeah, yeah.
it's I don't know. How does that medication work for people who don't have ADD?
Well, it is stimulating to some degree in anybody. Um, so that doesn't necessarily mean that a person has ADD if he gets stimulated with a stimulant medicine.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing, if you get the right medicine or the right dosage, it doesn't like hype you up. It actually slows you down and allows you to work more attentively. And that's the way that you can tell the difference as to whether the brain is really ADD wired or not.
Oh, so taking a medication, if it hypes you up,
It's probably not ADD.
it's not
And
ADD.
yeah,
If it slows you down, then you do probably have
right,
ADD.
right.
Hmm. So maybe I don't have ADD. I don't know. We'll never find out. I'll never
Well,
find
we
out.
don't know. You described it. You took 120 milligram, and it could be that you took literally twice as much as your brain wanted to be dealing with.
Okay, that's
So you
yeah.
got mixed results there that make it not easy to figure out.
Yeah. I felt like, and then I slept, I think, for like a good 48 hours after that. I was just totally,
Right.
what is this
Yeah,
pill?
you burned yourself out. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to, before we end the podcast, I really wanted to go over what noir is and if you could
Yes.
tell us more about it.
Yeah. Well, if you recall, I described the stuck situation that somebody discovers about their spy life after they've gotten through the first, crossing the line and then the excitement of getting hooked up with your handler and being taught all the trade craft and all that is so interesting and all that. And then you begin to realize, oh my God, what have I done? That's the signature statement for somebody in that next phase when they realize that they really boxed themselves in. And they don't have much of a choice, as I mentioned. If they try to get out of it with the handler, they're risking some very bad consequences, and they just no, better not do that. But to turn themselves in, well, you better not do that either. So you get stuck with you made your bed and now you have to sleep in it.
Mhm.
So, but is that good for the United States? The answer is no. Why? Because it means that that spy is pushed deeper into the arms of the spy handler and the KGB, so to speak. And that means more and more classified and important material is being given away to our enemy. This is not good. So I was trying to think of what is a solution, and the solution is the following: a safe, government-sanctioned, off-ramp exit for somebody who realizes that they want to stop being a spy. Right now, there are no options of how that can work out for that spy to quit that career and spare our country. So my point is that it serves our national purposes to figure out a system whereby they can turn themselves in, but safely, and stop spying. Now, I had to build, what would that include? The toughest nut to crack here is that you'd have to take off one specific punishment. Otherwise, nobody would want to avail themselves of it. And that makes people choke. Namely, you got to take jail off the table. Because I put myself in the shoes of a spy. If I was spying and stuck with the same conditions that I've been describing, and they said to me, yeah, you could turn yourself in and we'll probably be nicer to you and not give you as long a jail sentence, I'd say to myself, you know what? Screw you, I'll take my chances. So I wouldn't turn myself in. Well, that defeats the program. So you've got to get rid of that as the worst punishment. But all the other punishments you'd save. They'd have to lose their job, lose their clearance, maybe change their identity. They'd have to give up all their ill-gotten gains, whatever money they've gotten, be subjected to lifelong scrutiny of their finances to make sure that nothing is squirreled away that's illicit. On, different punishments, but not jail.
I thought
And what do we, yes.
Sorry, I thought the punishment was execution or life in prison. Would a smaller jail sentence be more?
No, it wouldn't, because you wouldn't trust the system for sticking with it. Believe me, I can tell you stories why that would be true, but I won't go into that now. Now, as for the execution, historically speaking, the last spies that were executed were the Rosenbergs, and that was in the early 50s. Nobody has been executed ever since. So that even though they talk about that as the ultimate punishment, it's a moot point because it never will happen. We're past that now for that being the punishment. So what does that leave? It leaves jail. That's the biggest, worst punishment.
And taking it off the table, well, obviously, I mean, I don't know. Isn't there a sense of deterrence, or is there clearly not? From what
there
we've
is,
seen?
Of course, that's the big argument against what I'm proposing. Except that, let's think about deterrence, and we know what the punishments for murder are in this country, right? Execution does happen for murder, and lifetime jail sentences for murder, and very long sentences for murder. And that's done a great job of stopping any murders from happening in the United States. Not. It just hasn't happened, has it?
No.
So what do we know from this? And for the most part, and any cop will agree with this, most murders, but not all, are committed in the heat of passion. They're crimes of passion. Are people sitting down and thinking with a calculator their odds of getting caught, therefore, whether or not they will be deterred by a long sentence or even execution in the heat of a crime? No. That's the decision to do these things is made when somebody's not rational, when they're being crazy and furious and whatever. So the argument that you lose deterrence, I think, is weak. I'm not saying it's zero, but I believe, based on my studies, that the decision to spy is not being made when somebody's got all their marbles together. So that deterrence does not figure into it anyhow from the start. So losing deterrence is not a big loss because it wasn't there in the first place.
So again, your proposal. You
My
said I read
proposal,
something,
yeah,
the good cop, bad cop strategy.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, it's a famous way that cops use to get confessions out of people that they are strongly suspecting of a spy. The one cop is the good guy who creates the warm relationship and is trying to help you. And the other cop plays the other side of it, all the threats and the warnings. And between those two dynamics, it kind of like makes the criminal, their head spin a bit, and one of those sides will maybe pay off, is really the idea over there. It's not quite exactly the model of what I'm proposing with my NOIR ideas, because my ideas are basically similar to make it prosaic. Now and then libraries, even libraries don't even half exist anymore because of the internet, but people would borrow books and not bring them back, right? So now and then libraries would have a special day when you can bring back the books that you had squirreled away for a year or two or three or 10, where you would owe hundreds of dollars worth of fines, but on this day, bring the book back, no fine, just do that, huh? So it's not an unprecedented concept that you set up a system where there's a safe off-ramp exit from whatever it is that's bad.
And you mentioned
and,
that's,
and
sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, you mentioned that's how we took down the mafia.
Yes, yeah.
By giving them an out.
That was the witness protection program. I actually spoke to the actual inventor of it before he passed away. We were sort of similar in spirit, you might say. And the idea was, yes, you would take a known killer, but he was in enough up in the ranks of the mafia that he had a huge amount of information that the government could use to break down the rest of the mafia. And for that, he would be allowed to not be prosecuted for his crimes because you had bigger fish to fry. That was, in effect, how that played. And that's done in the drug trade also by DEA and all that all the time. You want to get the guy at the corner, fine, but is he the important one to get, or the guy running the whole, cabal? So you got to make decisions as to how does it net out best for the country in terms of the positions that you take on, and that is really the spirit of what I'm proposing. It's not to be nice to spies, don't get me wrong, not at all. It's to be nice to the United States of America.
Elaborate on that.
If we can stop spying earlier, reducing the harms and the vulnerabilities to our country by getting a spy to turn himself in a year after he crossed the line instead of 10 years, this is doing something for the country at large that's far more important than having him stay in jail 6 extra years.
Right. Well, he'll probably die before those 6 years are up anyway.
Yeah, maybe. Or
I mean, if we're doing 15 back-to-back life sentences.
Try this. Is another thing that I came up with. Take a United States aircraft carrier that on its own is at least $100 billion, maybe $500 billion. Every aircraft on it, of which there are over 100, is at least $5 or $10 million. Then you have 5,000 sailors on board. And one well-placed missile might be able to sink the aircraft carrier. And if there were a spy that could give away the information that would allow an enemy to locate our aircraft carrier so that that missile could be launched at the aircraft carrier and lose us $500 billion worth of stuff, as well as 5,000 lives. And one spy gave that information away. Are we going to be happy to say we got that bastard spy and gave him a life sentence? And the fact that it cost our country all of what I've described, well, that's life.
Mm.
We got him in there for 25 years instead of just 3. That's a good deal. No, it's not a good deal for our country.
Right.
And that's what I'm talking about.
I hear that. And when you say this is what you propose, are you actively trying to get, how do you work on that?
It's this, for any tough new solution that is posed to the Washington establishment, what I've learned is that all you can do is just keep taking every opportunity to try to sell your idea to the people that have the powers to act on it, and just buckle in, because it's going to take a hell of a long time. And it may not happen in my lifetime, is what I've concluded. And they're going to try everything else. They're going to try every other thing but my idea. And I'm basically, I hate to say it, but you can see with your own 2 eyes by reading the news how far it's gotten in our country to try all these other methods. Not very far.
I mean, especially now, which was another thing I wanted to ask you about, is how has the spy game evolved? And after
it's evolved in many different ways, and some of the ways are based on information technology, cybersecurity, and all that. And it makes it seem as though, boy, that's all you need is to have a better machine learning, artificial intelligence strategy, and all that. But in the end, it still boils down to people in the right place that if they decide to be traders, they can work their way around whatever you come up with, because people are very shrewd. Whatever system you set up, they can defeat it.
Yeah.
And time has proven that again and again and again. So there's never going to be a reason not to try to solve the human factor problem.
Especially now, it seems like there are more spies now than there ever were.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, and it comes as a great cost to our nation and others, but it's not like it's not like we don't do it either, though.
We do it too. Absolutely.
Yeah. We just have to be better at catching people who do it to us.
That's right. That's right. And look, I'm glad you mentioned that, because my NOIR idea is something that we can do, but our enemy countries cannot do. And why is that? Because nobody can trust their own governments in these enemy nations. Well, who are we talking about? Russia. Oh, you're going to trust the Russian government to treat you nicely if you turn yourself in? Oh, yeah. The Chinese government? Oh, yeah. Iran, North Korea? They can't do my idea. We can do our idea. Canada can do it. UK can do it. Australia. Our friends can do it, because we have relatively trustworthy governments. I mean, they're not perfectly trustworthy, but relatively. So, we have a reputation of keeping our word for the most part, not those other countries. So that gives us an advantage that we can play to if we seize it.
Well, I hope that it works out, and that it works out in your lifetime too.
Yes, that would be sweet. I'm not holding my breath.
Well, thank you so much for today. Always interesting to speak to you. Always.
Well, thank you very much.
Got so much wisdom. What'd you say?
It's fun to speak with you also, and also toss in a little bit of Hebrew and whatever accents we can come up with.
Hit that like button and subscribe.